Today we're speaking about homographs, words that are spelled the same way and may or may not be pronounced the same way. Words like bow or bow, row or row, object or object, bass or bass, and refuse and refuse. Learn all about homographs in this episode of
Aprender Inglés con Reza y Craig.
Hello, I'm Reza.
And I'm Craig.
And with over 45 years of teaching experience between us, we'll help you improve your English and take it up to the next level. How are you, Craig?
I'm very well, thank you. How are you?
I'm fine. I'm enjoying myself. And you?
Yep, everything's wonderful and ready to start this week's podcast. If you're a new listener, you're very, very welcome. And we hope you enjoy this episode. And if you've heard us before, welcome back. We're starting this week with a mention and big hello to Marcelo Fernandez, who has very kindly transcribed episode 157. And to find that episode, go to inglespodcast.com/157. The episode speaks about Marcelo's true story and adjective prefixes, which was friend of the show Josep's question from Barcelona. So thank you very much, Marcelo, for transcribing that episode. It's free for everybody to read and enjoy and follow along with us. And I'm sorry it's taken me so long to put this message in the podcast. And next we have an audio message from Teresa.
Hello, Craig. I'm Teresa. I would like to tell you thank you for your podcast. It was very useful for improve my English.
Thank you, Teresa. It was really good to hear from you. Any comments, Teresa, on Teresa's message?
Your pronunciation is very good, Teresa. Really good. I really like your pronunciation. However, I did notice a couple of tiny little mistakes that we can improve. I think you said, I would like to tell you thank you, or something like that. It's more typical to say, I would like to say thank you. I think you also said, thank you for improve my English, which should be thank you for improving my English. For plus ing, because for is a preposition. Thank you for improving my English.
And thank you for your message, Teresa. It was very clear and it was lovely to hear from you. We love to hear from all of you listeners, and we always play your audio messages on the podcast because we want to hear your voices and help everybody to get to know everybody in the community. If you want to contribute, go to speakpipe.com/Ingles podcast. That's speakpipe.com/Ingles podcast.
Craig, we don't know, do we, where Teresa comes from?
No. So if you'd like to tell us where you're from, Teresa, and why you're studying English and what you do, where you are, and something about yourself, we would love to get to know you a bit more. Again, thanks for getting in touch.
Yeah, it's very interesting because, of course, we receive feedback from various countries in Central and South America, Spain, and places like Italy, Russia,
Finland,
India. We get feedback from all those countries. So we're always really interested to know, if you want to tell us, where you're listening from. For example, the next bit of feedback is on the website, and it comes from Salvador Navarro Maldonado from Mexico. And he gave us some interesting information about tipping las propinas in Mexico, right, Craig?
That's right. And we spoke about tipping back in episode 232. So to listen to that, go to inglespodcast.com/232. And this is what Salvador wrote to us. Hi, he said. I'm hearing this podcast to improve, better to say I'm listening to this podcast. I'm listening to this podcast to improve my level of English. I studied tourism in Mexico, so I want to explain why restaurants charge a tip when there's a group of more than 6 persons? I would say 6 people. When do we say persons and when do we say people? Because somebody asked that question recently.
For me, I would say persons is a very, very formal word. It does exist. Plural of person can be persons, but it sounds very formal. It's far more usual to use the plural of person, people.
That's right. So 1 person, 2 or more people. So back to Salvador, he said most of the restaurants in Mexico charge the waiters 2 to 4% of the total amount the waiter sells on the day. So if a group of customers don't give a tip to the waiter, he or she has to pay that percentage of the check. The percentage of the check that the restaurant charges the waiters are for the people in the kitchen. I remember us speaking about that when we spoke about tipping, and that's very strange to me that the restaurant charges the waiters 2 to 4% of what the waiter sells on the day. So that's like a commission on the food he or she is selling.
Yeah.
What's your opinion on that?
I'm not quite sure what to say about that. It's interesting. It's very unusual. I understand and I sympathize with the idea of getting some of the tip for the people in the kitchen who don't get to serve the customers, so they don't see the customers.
Although usually it's put in a box, isn't it? It's put in a jar or a box and then shared amongst all the staff, the waiters in the kitchen combined.
Usually, but it appears that in Mexico, no. In Mexico, there's a simple mathematical theory that they apply this 2 to 4% to whatever the waiter sells. But that could go very badly for the waiter as well. Imagine the waiter doesn't make many tips or no tips that day, but he still has to pay 2 or 4% of whatever he sold to the restaurant. He could have to actually pay money to the restaurant to sell their product, which seems a bit crazy if he doesn't get any tips.
It does, but on the other hand, it's a commission-based model, so the better the waiter or waitress does their job, the more food they sell, the more money the waiter or waitress makes, and the more money the restaurant makes. So it's a win-win.
No, I don't see it like that. From what I understand, he says 2 to 4% of the total amount that the waiter sells, the waiter must pay this to the restaurant, and the restaurant then give that to the kitchen staff, right? But what if he didn't make any tips at all? He has to pay 2 to 4% of what he sold, not of his tips.
Yes.
Of what he sold. So he's subsidizing the restaurant to give money to the kitchen.
Yeah, that's true.
And the more he sells, the more he has to pay, because it's 2 or 4% of what he sells. So the better he does his job, the more he gives to the restaurant.
That's true. So it's in his interest to maybe work less hard.
I don't know. It's a weird one. I'm not quite sure what to make of it.
Very interesting, Salvador. Very interesting and very different from the way restaurants work over here in Europe. So thank you for that information. Homographs. Well, in episode 235, we spoke about homophones, words with the same pronunciation but different spelling and different meanings. Words like sun and sun, S-O-N-S-U-N, C and C, S-E-A-S-E-E, and for and for, F-O-R and F-O-U-R. To listen to that, go to inglespodcast.com/235. In episode 237, we spoke about homonyms, words that are spelled the same and sound the same but have different meanings, like fine and fine, bank and bank, well and well, bien and pozo. So to listen to that one, go to inglespodcast.com/237. Today's episode is connected to those two. Reza, what's today's topic?
Today, we're speaking about homographs. Those are words that are spelled the same way and may or may not be pronounced the same way. We've got row, R-O-W, remar, but it could also be row, R-O-W, fila, or also ROW, but now pronounced row, different pronunciation, but still the same spelling, ROW, but now the pronunciation is row, and it's pelear or bronca. So, in fact, we're getting three meanings from one word, ROW. Two of them are pronounced the same, remar and fila, are row, and one of them, row, is pronounced differently. That's a good example of a homograph.
Just one point, that word or that meaning of row, pelea or bronca, is typically British English, to have a row with your neighbour or to row with your partner. It's a verb or a noun, but it's not typically used in American English. When was the last time you had a row?
Ooh.
I can't remember.
Probably the last time I was with my mum.
Yep, that's family. That's family for you.
Same for you, last time with family, yeah?
Yeah, probably with my sister. So let's look at some of these homographs, and we'll give you the two or more meanings of each one and how the pronunciation sometimes changes, or the stress on different syllables. For example, our first one is accent. ACCENT. I have a London accent. Reza has a Belfast accent. The way you speak. But what's the other meaning of that same word, Reza?
It can also be the stress on a word. For example, in Spanish, you actually write accents. Like in the word fácil, you put an accent on the A. So it's F-A with an accent. Yeah, A with a line above it. That line above the letter A is an accent in fácil. So that's another meaning of accent.
What instrument did Paul McCartney play in the Beatles?
He played various, actually, but most of all, I think he played bass guitar.
Correct. I think so. Yeah. He was known for mainly playing the bass guitar. So B-A-S-S, bass is bajo. But it also has another meaning. It's a type of fish with a different pronunciation. Bass or sea bass, which is lubina or roballo in Spanish.
Now, if I were to write the letters B-O-W, that could mean several things. It could mean to bend, to curve, to bend at the waist.
Like the Japanese.
Like the Japanese always do in a formal situation when they meet you. They bow, B-O-W, bow. Or if you meet a king or a queen, sometimes you're supposed to bow, B-O-W.
And I think the lower you bow, the more respect you give. Is that right?
I think so, in Japanese culture. But there's another use of B-O-W. The front of a boat is also called the bow. The front of the boat. So you've got the front, the bow, and the back is the stern, isn't it?
Yep. The bow and the stern.
But then if I change the pronunciation, but still with the letters B-O-W, but I say bow, different pronunciation, bow, that is a pair of tied loops. So when you tie your laces, you usually tie them in a bow, like a circular shape. That's a bow. Or you might even have a bow tie. You make a circular shape for la pajarita, a bow tie.
It's also arco, isn't it? A bow and arrow. Robin Hood used a bow and arrow.
Exactly. And if you think about it, the bow is kind of a circular shape as well. It's all kind of connected. So we got the pronunciation bow and we got the pronunciation bow for B-O-W.
Right. Now, some homographs have the same spelling, but because the stress changes, it changes the meaning or the type of word. And our next one is a good example. Compound is a noun. It could be an enclosed area with a building or a group of buildings inside. For example, you can have a prison compound. But when you change the stress from the first syllable to the second syllable, it changes from a noun to a verb. So compound is to mix or combine something, to compound ingredients, for example.
Another word I'm sure most of you have seen is content. Content. You feel happy, satisfied, you're content. But what if I change the stress? What if I say content and I stress the first syllable instead of the second? The meaning then is that which is contained inside something. For example, at the beginning of a book, quite often there's a page which tells you what the contents are. So content, happy, content, what's inside.
This podcast has great content. Contract is another word that follows the same rule. So contract is a verb, which means to get smaller. And a contract is an agreement, usually a written agreement between two or more people. So you have a work contract, for example, a contract of employment. And to contract could be to employ someone and also to get smaller. So that could have two meanings.
If I were to mention the Sahara, I'm sure most of you would know that I'm talking about a desert. A hot, arid, very dry area. A desert. D-E-S-E-R-T. One S, not double S, one S. But the same spelling can give us the word desert with one S, which means to leave. A typical use is to desert from the army. Imagine you're a soldier and you're supposed to be fighting, but you just abandon the army. That means you have deserted. To desert. You are a deserter.
Next word, discount, which is descuento. So if you buy something in the sales, you probably get a discount from the price. But as a verb, to discount means to underestimate the significance or to give no credence to something. So you're kind of ignoring it. Oh, I discount your opinion of that particular political viewpoint. I discount your ability to do the job properly. I'm dismissing it. I'm refusing it. So again, the stress changes. Discount is the verb and discount is the noun.
I'm sure a lot of you know the word down, D-O-W-N, the opposite of up. So in a lower position, it's down. But another meaning of down is soft, fairy, fluffy, the pelusa, feathers. Like when a baby duck, un patito, is born, instead of having feathers, plumas, it has down. This kind of fluffy, like pelusa, you say in Spanish, this soft material around it. That's also called down. In this case, the pronunciation doesn't change for the two words. It's the same.
Do you sleep on a down pillow?
Yes, I do.
Comfortable, aren't they?
Very comfortable, yeah. Do you use an eiderdown?
Only in the winter. No. What's an eiderdown?
An eiderdown basically is a way of saying a quilt, or if you prefer,
a duvet.
A duvet, un edredon, made of down. This soft, fluffy material from birds. An eiderdown.
They're very warm. Fine can be multa. It's the verb and the noun to fine somebody for speeding or to pay a fine. Of course, fine can also mean bien, it's good. Yeah, it's really fine. It's very good. Or maybe sharp. If your knife has a fine edge, then it's very, very sharp.
The word frequent, that would be an adjective, frequent, as I'm sure a lot of you know, means occurring regularly. For example, some of you are, thankfully, frequent listeners to our podcast. You listen every week, and we're very thankful to you if you're a frequent listener. But if I change the stress and say to frequent, and now it's the second syllable, quent, which is stressed, that means to visit a place regularly.
Is there a pub that you frequent regularly in your area?
No, there isn't. I don't frequent pubs. Actually, I don't drink that much in pubs. I do not frequent them.
Do you collect frequent flyer miles? Are you a frequent flyer?
I am, but I'm afraid EasyJet and Ryanair and similar companies don't give such frequent flyer miles.
No, they don't.
I wish I could afford more expensive flights, but since I do the podcast for free, I can't.
The next word, this is something we use in our house, incense. Incense is something that produces a very pleasant smell, very pleasant odor when you burn it. So we like to have sandalwood incense in the flat. But incense, when you change the stress, becomes a verb, incense, which means to get angry or to make somebody angry. I was incensed when I discovered that someone had scratched my car. I was really, really angry. Incensed.
The letters L-E-A-D could be pronounced in two different ways. We could say lead, to be a leader, to go first, and you got the followers behind you, you're a leader. Or it could be lead, the type of metal, in Spanish, plomo. Lead or lead are both L-E-A-D.
And that word has led us to the next one. There are 60 seconds in a minute. But if you change the stress on minute, you get the word minute as an adjective, which means very, very small. So my mobile phone is a minute device, a minute computer. Memory sticks or thumb drives these days are becoming minute things that you can easily lose. So minute, very, very small. And minute, there are 60 seconds in a minute and 60 minutes in an hour.
Craig's been talking about pen drives, USBs. They are an object, a thing you can see or touch. But if I were to say object, then it's a verb. For example, I object to people having conversations in the cinema. I think it's very disruptive. I object to it. Same spelling, O-B-J-E-C-T, but now it means a verb, which is that you're opposed to something.
Proceed, the verb to proceed, means to advance, to continue to the next thing. So gradually we are proceeding through our list of words. But if you change the stress, you get a different word, proceeds. Proceeds, the money or profit you get from selling something or doing business. If you had a charity dinner, for example, then you would probably give the proceeds to your charity, the money you earn, the money you gain from the event. So change the stress, different word, to proceed and proceeds.
To produce is a common verb. It means to create or make. For example, in Spain, they produce a lot of olive oil. They make it, they produce it. But I could also talk about the olive oil as a produce. If I change the stress and put it on the first syllable, so to produce, a produce, it means the thing which you have produced. It's very typical for fruit and vegetables, a produce. It's not typical for other things like manufactured or electronic devices. We would call those a product.
So I would say Valencia produces rice.
Yes.
Valencia produces oranges.
Yep. So rice and oranges are a typical produce of Valencia. Whereas many electronic products come from China. So if it's not something you grow, not a fruit or vegetable, you tend to say product.
My life is full of projects. I have teaching projects, I have internet projects, I have recording projects these days. But if you change the stress on the word project, you get project, to project forward, which means to go or throw yourself forward. Also, you can project a picture onto a wall. You can project an image onto a screen. Reza, what do you project for yourself for the new year? Do you have any projects in mind for 2019?
Any project? The only project for sure is to keep on podcasting.
Okay. No DIY projects or anything like that that are projected for the new
I'm too frightened to speak because,
because when it gets recorded,
well, frequent listeners know I've been talking about this for about 5 years and haven't actually done it. But yeah, I would like to do something with my house, but best not to speak about it. Who knows?
Okay. You don't want it recorded. I totally understand, because when it's recorded, it's not a dream, it's a plan. So it's a projection into the next year. I totally understand that. The next word is refuse. As a verb, you probably know to refuse means to say no, to decline something. I refuse to accept the job offer. I refuse to accept your apology. When you change the stress, it becomes rubbish, refuse. Refuse collectors collect rubbish. So refuse is rubbish, and refuse, the verb is to rechazar.
A very well-known word for most of you will be the word second. A second is, of course, 1/60th of a minute. There are 60 seconds in a minute. Or second can also mean between first and third. First, second, third. Everybody knows that, I imagine. But you may not know the word second, which is the same spelling, second, but now stressing the second syllable, and it means to release a person temporarily to work in a different department or unit. For example, imagine I normally work in the finance department of my bank, but I've been seconded to work in the investment department just for a year because they think they need more staff and that I could give them some good tips. So for 1 year, I'm going to work in the investment department. I've been seconded for a year to the investment department. Temporarily, I'll work in another unit.
Subject, the verb, means to put someone under some authority or control. For example, the government subjected the citizens to a curfew, which means they had to be in bed as soon as it gets dark, to subject people to do something. But of course, when you change the stress, you get the word subject, which is a noun, which means topic. I studied English at school, and that was my favourite subject. What was your favourite subject at school?
Ooh, good question.
Music? English? Writing?
I don't know. I didn't really have a favourite. I like most things, yeah. TEAR. What could that be? Well, it could be tear. That sound of the paper, being
Torn.
Tear, tore, torn. It's an irregular verb. Or it could be a drop of water from the eye. Una lagrima. Oh no, Craig's very sad.
Somebody's taken my chocolate.
Oh, he's crying. I can see tears in his eyes. T-E-A-R, tear. T-E-A-R, tear.
Wind is viento. It's a windy day. The wind is blowing. But there's another pronunciation to that word, and it changes the meaning. Wind means to turn something in a circular, usually a circular direction. I don't know if some of you remember, there used to be watches and clocks that were wound. That's the passive, wind.
They still are.
Still are, but not. When was the last time you saw a watch that people actually wind?
Last night.
Really?
A 20-year-old student of mine had one.
Really? Seriously? Well, you don't see many.
A 20-year-old student.
It's impressive. I think now they're more a fashion accessory rather than a practical device. But yeah, watches used to wind watches up. And the phrasal verb to wind up can also mean fastidiar. For example, don't wind me up. Don't make me angry. Don't make me annoyed. You're upsetting me. You're winding me up.
Wind is an irregular verb. The past of wind and the past participle is wound. Wind, wound, wound. For example, last night, my student wound his watch. But W-O-U-N-D, apart from wound, turned, can also be a wound, una herida, an injury. wound is the past of wound, or it's erida, wound.
Another irregular verb is read, R-E-A-D, because the past of read is read, although the spelling is exactly the same. How confusing is that? So read, read, read. To read a book, yesterday I read an interesting blog post.
Craig, what's black and white but red all over?
A newspaper.
Yes. Craig got it. Blanco y negro, pero leído in todas partes, red. Not rojo, leído, red. Now, even a native speaker would have to think for a few seconds if they saw the next word, A-N-A-L-Y-S-E-S, because it could be the third person singular of the verb analyze. For example, the scientist analyzes. She analyzes things in the laboratory, analyzes. But it could also be the plural of the noun analysis, which is pronounced analyses. Different pronunciation. Are you going to carry out an analysis? Well, in fact, I'm going to carry out 2 analyses. Same spelling as the verb, she analyzes. Different pronunciation.
The next word has to be one of my favorite words of all time, buffet, which is a variety of dishes that you choose from and you taste different things and then you sit down and eat and go back and have a second or maybe third plate. The secret of a buffet is to taste everything on the table, just a little piece, and then go back for the good stuff when you know what you like. That's one meaning of the word buffet. Reza, what's the other meaning?
Well, the other pronunciation is buffet. So the letters are B-U-F-F-E-T. To buffet is to strike or to hit, golpear, sometimes repeatedly. Storms have buffeted the coast of Cuba. Recently, they've buffeted. There have been a lot of problems day after day on many occasions. The storms buffeted the coast of Cuba.
And our final word in our list of homographs, address, which you may know as dirección. What's your address? Where do you live? But it also, as a verb, means to speak to people, to direct your speech towards a group. For example, can you tell the staff that I will address them after the meeting? Or could you tell the students that they will be addressed by the school principal? So to speak to a large group is to address. Of course, you can also address a situation. The Prime Minister will address the Brexit situation as soon as possible.
Craig, quite correctly in British English, just used one pronunciation there. But of course, if he was American, for the meaning of location, he would have said address, and he would have changed the stress. So in British English, we don't change the stress. But in American English, for dirección, they say address. And for the other meanings...
What do they say?
Address. And for the other 2 meanings, deal with a situation or speak to a group, they say address.
That's right. Yeah. Well, you've been very patient while we've been addressing you with all these homographs, so we hope you've learned something in this podcast. And now it's your turn to practice your English. Can you send us a voice message and include some of these words in your message? That's the challenge. That's the task for you this week. Send us a message and try to practice this vocabulary. You can send your message to speakpipe.com. That's speakpipe.com/Ingles podcast, or record your voice, attach it to an email and send it to Reza at belfastreza@gmail.com.
Or what about to Craig? He's at craig@inglespodcast.com.
And we'd like to thank all our wonderful Patreons who are supporting the podcast. The names can be found on the website at inglespodcast.com/240. Special thanks, as always, to our gold sponsor on Patreon, who is Bruno, offering walking tours of Copenhagen through his company, CopenhagenWalkingTour.com. Thank you for your continued support, Bruno. Also, if you're going to Rio de Janeiro, why not go on his favela walking tour. For more information, go to favelawalkingtour.com.br. The tours are led by local guides only, and they're very safe, and they also help to put money back into the community.
You could join our Patreon program if you like. For as little as just $1 per month, you can get instant access to recent transcriptions as a member of our Patreon program. Those transcriptions have been transcribed in great detail by Angelica Bello from Madrid. If you're interested, have a look at Patreon, that's Patreon, patreon.com/English podcast.
Thank you, Angelica, for your wonderful transcriptions. Also, thank you to our latest 5 Patreon supporters, and we always include the latest supporters in every month. So, Caro Torres, thank you. Jose Maria Hernandez, also thank you. Carmen Martinez, Rafael Castro Guzman, and Juan Pablo Chamorro Villoria. Thank you very much for joining us on Patreon. Reza, what's next week?
Next week's episode is about artificial intelligence.
Interesting. Okay. Well, we'll see you next week. Thanks for listening this week. Until then, it's goodbye from me.
And goodbye from me.
The music in this podcast is by Pitts. The track is called See You Later.